Thank you very much for being on the programme. Well, we just heard from Matt Hancock. What's your reaction to his interview?
Well, I'm angry, to be honest. I've been watching, like everybody else, the case rates rising for several weeks and seen every day this week we've raised with the government the fact that this new strain of the virus surely means that Christmas plans have to be revised. And yet every day that concern has been dismissed, ridiculed by the Prime Minister in the House of Commons on Wednesday, only to find yesterday that people have made plans over the last week that now lie in tatters, with very little time to sort that out before Christmas, and that the virus has been allowed to spread. Over and over again we've seen the same pattern, a Prime Minister who rejects the evidence, who ridicules and mocks people who raise concerns, who dithers and delays, and then ends up having to change his mind at the 11th hour. This is how a country that has pioneering scientists and a healthcare system that is the envy of the world ends up with the worst number of deaths in Europe and the worst recession of any major economy. We just cannot continue like this.
Because what Matt Hancock and the government would argue is that they couldn't have predicted the new variant. They only got the evidence on Friday of transmissibility. I understand, the difficulties that many have and the anger many feel towards the way this policy has been communicated, building up people's hopes, taking them away again. But is the policy itself the right thing to do, something that Labour supports?
It's absolutely the right thing to do to bring in tougher restrictions around Christmas, and I think most of the country could see for several weeks that this is where it was going. We didn't know about the new strain of the virus a few weeks ago, but we did know that case rates were rising at an alarming rate in some parts of the country, particularly in London and the South East. And Matt Hancock came to the House of Commons on Monday to report that there was this new strain of the virus, which he said at the time was particularly virulent. The government did know that this was an emerging problem, and yet 2 days later the Prime Minister went to the House of Commons, mocked and ridiculed concerns that were raised about it, and said that those who were concerned about it, like Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, were seeking to criminalise people and to cancel Christmas. The trouble with all of this is that it's the government that is always too slow to act on the evidence that is in front of them in plain sight. And we've seen this over and over again over the last 12 months, and that is why we're in this situation right now. Going into the new year, I didn't hear anything from Matt Hancock that suggested that the government is really going to get a grip on this. We'll have schools returning in the first week or so of the new year. They've really got to start getting mass testing rolled out in schools, get a grip on test, trace and isolate, and make sure that they execute the vaccination plan properly so that we can get that rolled out across the country.
On schools specifically, should the government be considering closing schools in Tier 4 areas where the virus is increasing?
I think schools should be the last thing to close and the first thing to open. We've said that all year, and the reason for that is because we've seen what is happening to children when they have prolonged periods of absence from school. We'll be living with the consequences of this for generations to come if we don't get this right. So
I understand you think it should be the last thing, the last resort, but is that something that should be considered as a last resort if infections are still rising?
Well, I think we should start focusing on the first resort. The first resort is about getting mass testing into schools, and so far the government has, for a month, has been mucking about, not getting those plans in place. We've had endless questions and debates about that in the House of Commons, and only on Friday were head teachers sent instructions about what they were supposed to do over the school holidays. So after one of the most stressful years that I think any of them can remember, they're now working flat out over the school holidays to try and put new plans in place for January. We just can't continue like this. The government has got to get mass testing into schools. They should try and keep schools open. It just cannot countenance the idea that for some children they'll have what is effectively almost a year of missed education. They will live with those consequences for a long time to come, and the most disadvantaged children will be the ones who suffer the most. We just shouldn't be debating whether we should be closing schools. We should be debating how we safely keep them open.
The announcement yesterday, of course, affected, well, everybody in the country. Millions of people having their Christmas plans ruined. Many of us living under these Tier 4 restrictions for well, after hearing from Matt Hancock, potentially some months to come. Do you think Parliament needs to be recalled so MPs can vote on it?
Well, there will be a vote, as Matt Hancock said to you earlier. There'll be a vote at some point before the 1st of February. And I think the most important thing right now is just that there is clarity about the new rules and that we make sure that people understand those and can follow them safely. I don't think it'd be wise for MPs to be travelling across the country into London in the south east, which is now subject to Tier 4 restrictions, in order to debate something that the government has the power to do, that they've said very clearly must be done in the last 24 hours. We finally got clarity. We now need to focus on making sure that people have the support that they need to follow the rules and to get to grips with what has been a really chaotic set of announcements over the last 24 hours. Now that we've got clarity, I think that should absolutely be the priority.
I'm interested as well in how strictly you think the rules should be enforced. Should the police be able to hand out fines to people who break the rules over Christmas? If you knew your neighbour was breaking the rules, would you call the police? What's the position?
Well, here in the north of England, we've been living under quite serious restrictions since the summer, and the police here have largely, I think, got it right in very difficult circumstances. They've taken a fairly light touch approach. They haven't wanted to bust in on children's birthday parties and family dinners, but they have been very visible. They have been reminding people about how serious this is. When they need to take action, they do. But in general, they're trusting people, they're asking people, they're appealing to people to look out for one another and keep each other safe. And I think most of the country is absolutely trying to do that. Where we run into problems is not so much about enforcement or lack of enforcement. The problem is when people are confused about what the rules are, and that's why it is so serious that the Prime Minister on Wednesday was saying in the House of Commons that Christmas would absolutely go ahead as planned, that there was no chance at all, it would be inhumane, he said, to cancel Christmas, and then just a few days later is saying something different. We just cannot have a Prime Minister continuing to make promises that he knows he cannot keep. We've seen this all year. We just need a far better communication from this government, far more honesty.
Matt Hancock told me that he had called his mum to say that, Christmas was off. How are you planning on spending Christmas?
Yeah, I called my mum as well, actually, and Keir had a phone call with the Prime Minister yesterday ahead of the announcement, and one of the first things I did was to call my mum just to talk about Christmas. We were always planning a very small, quiet family Christmas. We're in a support bubble with my mum, and so we're planning to continue that. But it is hard because I do have family members who are going to be spending Christmas alone this year. That's not something any of us really wanted to see, but we're just trying to do what I think everybody else is trying to do, which is to say, this has been one hell of a year, and we've just got to chalk it up to 2020. This is what it's been like. And hopefully this time next year we'll be in a far, far better position if we all stay safe and follow the rules and look after each other.
It does feel like quite a universal reaction. First thing you do is you want to get on the phone to your mum to try and work out what on earth to do in the situation that we're all in. Of course, top of everyone's mind this morning is the COVID restrictions, what it means for them and their families. But it's right to touch on Brexit as well, because we've just got 11 days till the end of the transition. If there is a deal, is Labour minded to back it?
We'd be minded to back it, but we don't know what would be in it. And we've had, over the last few months, we've had a Prime Minister that has broken promises over and over again, that has tried to use the Good Friday Agreement as a bargaining chip in negotiations, and has threatened to tear up international law in order to get his deal through. So we want to see that deal first. We don't trust that the Prime Minister will come back with a deal that's in the national interest, but we've always said that we think that a deal is absolutely essential. No deal would be a disaster for many businesses and people across this country. So we would be minded to support it, but we need to see what's in it. What we hope most of all is that the government will get its act together in these last 11 days and make sure that there is a deal and that people aren't waking up on the 1st of January in the middle of a global pandemic with all of the chaos that a no-deal Brexit would bring.
It's interesting, isn't it? You say there that Labour's always been of the view that you'd like to see a deal. At the same time, though, if I kind of rewind to the not too distant past, you've always been someone who's talked about the importance of honouring the result of the referendum. You seriously considered backing Theresa May's deal at a time when Keir Starmer was actually arguing for a second referendum. Is he finally catching up with you?
I think it's more a question of the options that we've got in front of us and confronting those realities. The truth is that the question was fundamentally settled last December at the general election when the Prime Minister won a majority, an 80-seat majority, with the promise to get Brexit done. The option of a second referendum is gone. We have left the European Union, we left in January. So the option is, do we have a deal or do we not have a deal? Do we continue to trade? Do our businesses continue to thrive? Can we continue to do well as a country, or are we going to allow the government to crash us out of the EU without a deal and hold the country back? And that, on that, I think the Labour Party is completely united. We have got to go forwards. We've got to stop the disunity and the division that has held the country back over recent years, and we've got to get a good deal. And Keir and I are absolutely of one mind about that.
OK. Lisa Nandy, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme. Thank you.
Thanks.